The first mistake was calling the human a gardener. The second was dragging a crying hatchling into the command bay and putting a plasma cutter against her throat. The third was believing Mira Hale looked calm because she did not understand what was about to happen. I was there when the pirates took the Mercy Lantern. I saw the boarding doors melt inward. I smelled the scorched alloy, heard the warning sirens choke and die, watched 37 armed Korath spill into our evacuation vessel like predators entering a nest. I had served in the Veyran defense fleet for 19 cycles. I had survived border raids, moon sieges and the famine riots on Vel Tor. I knew fear. I knew violence, but I had never seen anything like the silence that fell over the humans. There were only 6 of them aboard the Mercy Lantern. 6 humans among nearly 800 refugees from 21 species. They were not soldiers. That had been made clear to us during boarding. 1 engineer, 2 teachers, a translator, an old man who repaired water filters, and Mira Hale, the hydroponic specialist assigned to keep the oxygen gardens alive during the 6-day flight to Sanctuary Line. That was what her file said, hydroponic specialist. The Korath commander laughed when he read it. He was called Rask, though later I learned pirates often change their names, so the dead cannot follow them. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with bone plates across his face and 4 black eyes that never blinked at the same time. His raiders wore scavenged armor and carried weapons stolen from 3 different wars. They had chosen us because we were harmless, a refugee vessel, unarmed, full of children, elders, medics and frightened families fleeing the collapse of the outer colonies. I remember thinking that the Mercy Lantern was the easiest target in the lane. Rask must have thought the same. He gathered us in the central atrium, beneath the hanging oxygen vines that Mira had grown along the ceiling to stabilize the ship's atmosphere. The vines glowed faint blue in the emergency lights. Around me, families clutched one another. Hatchlings whimpered. Elders whispered prayers to gods from worlds that no longer existed. Rask walked through them like a king walking through livestock. "Your governments will pay," he said, his voice amplified through the ship-wide speakers. "If they refuse, we sell what survives." Nobody moved, nobody dared. Then one of his raiders shoved a small Thal child forward. Her name was Eerie. I knew that because her mother had asked me to help find her blanket 2 hours before the attack. Eerie was no taller than my knee, with silver fur and trembling ears, and she made a sound so soft it hurt more than screaming. Rask grabbed her by the back of the neck and lifted the plasma cutter. That was when Mira Hale stepped forward, not fast, not dramatically. She simply moved out of the line of refugees as if she had been waiting for a moment only she could recognize. "Put her down," she said. The atrium turned toward her. I wanted to tell her to be quiet. I wanted to pull her back before the Korath noticed her fully. Humans were new to the evacuation coalition then. Most of us still treated them like emotional primitives with clever machines. Useful, yes, brave in small bursts maybe, but fragile, too attached, too soft, too willing to risk everything for one life when mathematics demanded sacrifice. Rask looked at her, then he smiled. "You are the gardener." Mira's face did not change. She was small by galactic standards, with tired eyes, dark hair tied back with a strip of cloth, and soil stains still visible beneath her nails. She wore no armor, no weapon, not even a military insignia, just a green maintenance jacket and a badge that said Botanical Life Support. "Yes," she said. The pirates laughed. I did not. Something about the human refugees behind her had changed. That the engineer lowered his gaze. The old man closed his eyes. One of the teachers quietly reached for the child beside him and covered the child's ears. At the time, I did not understand why. Rask lowered the plasma cutter until the blue edge kissed the fur below Eerie's jaw. The child froze so completely I thought her heart had stopped. "Gardeners do not give orders," Rask said. Mira looked at the blade, then at the child, then at Rask. "But no," she said softly. It was not a threat. That was what made it worse. Rask stepped closer to her. "You think your species frightens me?" "No." "Then what do you think?" Mira's hands were shaking. I saw it clearly. Her fingers moved once, twice, almost like she was counting invisible beads. "I think you have 11 minutes, she said. Rask's smile faded just a little. The pirates checked their scanners. I checked mine. No fleet signature, no distress response, no hidden weapons charging in the hull. The Mercy Lantern was still alone in the dark between stars. Rask laughed again, louder this time, performing for his raiders. 11 minutes until what? Mira did not answer. That was the first clue. The second came when every human in the atrium took one careful breath at the same time. Not panic, not prayer, preparation. Rask ordered 2 raiders to seize Mira. They slammed her to her knees in the center of the atrium. One twisted her arm behind her back hard enough that several refugees looked away. Mira made a sound, but not the kind Rask wanted. No pleading, no fear, just a tight breath through clenched teeth. "Open every cargo vault," Rask ordered. "Transfer navigation control. And tell your governments they have 1 hour to respond." I was the senior security officer aboard, though my authority had become useless the moment the pirates burned through our doors. They forced me to unlock the civilian manifest. They made the captain kneel beside me. They dragged technicians to consoles and demanded access codes. And Mira stayed on her knees beneath the oxygen vines, watching the child, not the pirates, not the weapons. The child, Iri, was still in Rask's grip, small claws curled against his wrist, eyes shining with frozen terror. Mira mouthed something to her. I could not hear it, but I saw the child blink once. Then again, later, I learned humans teach children games for surviving disasters, breathing games, counting games, ways to stay quiet in smoke under rubble, beneath collapsed schools, inside flooding cars, during storms that tear houses from the earth. At the time, I only saw a frightened child begin to breathe in rhythm with a kneeling human. Rask grew impatient. He struck Mira across the face with the back of his armored hand. The sound cracked through the atrium. The human engineer took one step forward. Mira turned her head just enough to look at him. He stopped. That was the third clue. She was not the most dangerous human in the room because she could fight. She was the most dangerous because the others obeyed her without a word. Rask leaned down. "Your 11 minutes are passing, Gardner." Mira spat blood onto the floor. Then she looked up at the glowing vines overhead. "Yes," she said, "they are." A raider near the environmental console cursed suddenly. Rask turned. "Report." "The air mix is shifting." The raider slapped controls with growing irritation. Warning symbols began appearing across the console in 3 languages. Oxygen increase in sectors 4 through 7. Nitrogen displacement in maintenance spine. Humidity rising in ventilation arteries. Rask swung back toward Mira. She was still on her knees. Still unarmed, still bleeding. "What did you do?" Mira smiled then, not wide, not proud, barely even visible. I gardened. The oxygen vines above us pulsed brighter. All around the atrium, the hanging leaves began to curl. Rask ordered the raider to cut environmental control. The console refused him. He ordered another to access manual overrides. Those refused too. Then a third pirate shouted from the corridor that hatch seals were locking one by one throughout the ship. Not main doors, not security bulkheads, small doors, maintenance doors, ventilation grates, irrigation channels, hydroponic service tunnels, the parts of the ship nobody thinks about until they stop obeying. Mira had spent 5 days aboard the Mercy Lantern tending plants, quietly, invisibly, crawling through ducts, inspecting mist lines, calibrating root beds, mapping humidity, adjusting light panel, learning the ship not as a passenger learns it, not as a soldier learns it, but as a caretaker learns a living thing. She knew where it breathed. She knew where it drank. She knew where it could choke. Rask pressed the plasma cutter harder against Iri's throat. "Stop it." Mira's eyes moved to the child again. "I can't," he snarled. "You will." "No," she said. I can't stop what already started." The first pirate collapsed 9 seconds later. He was guarding the upper balcony, weapon raised, shouting at a group of refugees to keep their heads down. Then his legs folded. He hit the deck with a heavy metallic crash. 2 others spun toward him. Then they collapsed too. The atrium erupted. Pirates shouted. Refugees screamed. Rask dragged Iri back against his chest and raised his weapon toward Mira's head. I felt the air change then. It grew warmer, wetter, heavier. My tongue tasted copper. My eyes watered. The Korath began coughing first because their respiratory membranes were exposed along the sides of their necks. A design flaw, Mira would later call it. Not cruelly, just accurately. The humans were already covering children's faces with damp cloth. They had known. Somehow, they had known. Rask fired into the ceiling. Blue fire tore through a curtain of vines. Sap rained down, glittering in emergency light. Smell was sharp and green and strange. "Stop this or the child dies," Mira's expression changed. Until that moment I had thought I was looking at courage. I was wrong. Courage still contains fear. Courage wrestles with it. What I saw in Mira Hale's face was decision, clean, cold, final. "Captain," she said without looking away from Rask. "Seal atrium drainage." Our captain stared at her. Rask screamed, "Do not touch that console." Mira spoke again, louder. "Seal it now." The captain hit the command. Every drain in the atrium sealed with a deep metallic thud. For half a second, Nothing happened. Then the fire suppression system activated. Not mist, not foam, water, tons of it. It exploded from the ceiling in a roaring white flood, hammering pirates to the floor, ripping weapons from their grips, turning the polished atrium deck into a violent rushing current. Refugees had already been guided back by the humans, pressed against raised benches and cargo ridges. The pirates, heavier and armored, lost balance immediately. Rask did not. He dug his claws into the deck plating and kept the child against him. Mira moved. I had seen soldiers charge. I had seen warriors leap under cannon fire. I had seen desperate parents cross burning corridors for their young. Mira did not move like any of them. She moved like a person who had practiced in worse conditions. Water struck her sideways. She went with it instead of against it. She slid across the flooding deck, caught one of the hanging vine cables, swung low beneath Rask's weapon, and slammed both feet into the back of his knee. He dropped not far, but enough. Iri slipped from his grip. Mira caught her with one arm. Rask roared and swung the plasma cutter. Mira turned her body around the child. The cutter burned across her shoulder instead of Iri's throat. I smelled human skin burn. Mira made no sound. That silence did something to the room that no weapon could have done. It entered every witness. It told us with terrible clarity that this was not a gardener who had become brave in an emergency. This was a survivor returning to familiar territory. The old human at the back of the room shouted one word. Down. Every human dropped. A heartbeat later, the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the atrium. Korath see heat. Viran see motion trails. Thal see bioluminescent outlines. Humans, I had been told, see poorly in darkness. Another assumption: the emergency grow lights flashed on in ultraviolet bursts, too fast for most species to process cleanly. The oxygen vines released clouds of pollen engineered for pollination cycles, harmless to refugees, but thick enough to blind thermal sight and scatter motion signatures. The pirates fired wildly. Their shots struck walls, vines, water, nothing. In the flashing dark, humans moved from child to child, not attacking. Rescuing, the engineer dragged two elders behind a bench. The teachers passed hatchlings hand to hand through a service opening that had not existed on any public deck map. The translator shouted instructions in 6 languages, calm as a bedtime story. The old man jammed a broken filter rod through the trigger assembly of a fallen pirate rifle and tossed it aside. And Mira carried Iri through waist-deep water while Rask hunted her by sound. I tried to reach them. I truly did. But a pirate slammed me into the deck before I could move 3 steps. My vision blurred. My left arm went numb. I remember tasting blood and shame. I was the security officer. I was trained, armed, decorated, and the gardener was saving my ship. Rask found her near the central root column. He struck her from behind. Mira fell hard, still twisting, so the child landed on top of her instead of beneath her. Iri rolled free, crying now alive. Mira pushed her toward a human teacher. "Go," she whispered. Rask grabbed Mira by the throat and lifted her from the water. The grow lights strobed across them. Pirate and human, monster and gardener, violence and restraint. "Enough," Rask growled. "No more tricks." Mira's feet dangled above the flooded deck. Blood ran down her sleeve from the burn in her shoulder. One eye was swelling. Her breath came in sharp, broken pulls against his grip, and still she looked at the child first. Only after Iri disappeared through the service hatch did Mira look at Rask. "You should have taken the cargo," she said. Rask tightened his grip. "What?" "You should have taken the cargo and left." Then the ship spoke. Not the computer, not the captain, the ship itself. A deep groan rolled through the deck, through the walls, through the water around our legs. The oxygen vines along the ceiling snapped tight. Their root cables, woven through structural supports, contracted all at once. The atrium transformed. Benches folded down into barriers. Cargo rails locked into defensive angles. Emergency partitions dropped from above. The flooded water surged toward newly opened side channels, dragging pirates off balance and carrying their fallen weapons away into sealed drains. A civilian evacuation atrium became a kill box without killing anyone. That was the part that terrified me most. The humans had built a trap that did not need corpses to work. Rask lost his footing for half a second. Mira used that half second. She drove 2 fingers into the exposed membrane beneath his jaw plate. Not a punch. Not a warrior's blow, a precise interruption of biology. Rask's entire body seized. His grip opened. Mira dropped into the water, caught his wrist, turned under his arm, and forced his own weight against the joint. The pirate commander fell face first into the flood. Mira kept him there, not long enough to drown, long enough for him to understand that she could. Then she let him breathe. That mercy broke him more than the pain. Around us, the remaining pirates were being sealed into compartments, stunned by improvised current traps, trapped under cargo nets, blinded by pollen bursts, or disarmed by refugees who had stopped believing they were helpless. Not one pirate died in the atrium. Not one refugee was lost. When the lights returned to normal, Mira Hale stood over Rask with his plasma cutter in her hand. She did not point it at him. She threw it into the water behind her. The sound it made was small, but every pirate heard it. Rask coughed, shaking, humiliated in front of his own raiders. "Why?" he rasped. Mira touched her burned shoulder and winced for the first time. "Because children are watching." I looked around. She was right. Dozens of children stared from behind benches, from service hatches, from their parents' arms. They had watched the pirates come in as monsters. They had watched the humans become something worse than monsters. They had watched them become controlled. The distress fleet arrived 18 minutes later. By then, the Mercy Lantern had retaken itself. Not with cannons, not with soldiers, not with rage, with water pressure, plant biology, ship maintenance, child psychology, and the terrifying human habit of turning every environment into a promise. Hurt the helpless, and the room itself will rise against you. The official reports called it the Atrium Incident. The Korath survivors called it a dishonor. The refugees called it a miracle. I called it my failure for a long time. Mira disagreed. I found her in the medical bay after the pirates were restrained. She sat on the edge of a treatment cot while a Thal medic cleaned the burn across her shoulder. Iri slept beside her, wrapped in a thermal blanket, one tiny hand clutching Mira's green jacket. I stood in the doorway, unable to enter. Mira noticed me anyway. Humans always notice doorways. "I should have stopped them sooner," I said. She looked exhausted then. More exhausted than she had looked with a blade at a child's throat. "You kept people calm," she said. I froze. "You stayed visible," she replied. "Sometimes that's what keeps panic from spreading." I did not know what to say to that. Vayrans are not raised to accept comfort easily, especially from those who have earned the right to condemn us. So I asked the question everyone would ask once the story spread. "What are you?" Mira looked down at Iri's sleeping hand, a gardener. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbearable. "Your file says botanical life support." "That's true. It does not say you can retake a ship with irrigation systems." Her face softened, but not with pride. "No," she said. "Files don't usually mention the things people learn when everything goes wrong. Only later did I learn pieces of her past. Not from her. Humans are strange about pain. They build monuments to strangers and walls around themselves. I learned she had been 19 when the Atlantic storms drowned 3 coastal cities in 1 week. I learned she spent 9 days cutting children out of a collapsed school with floodwater rising around her neck. I learned she designed emergency oxygen gardens for sealed shelters after earthquakes, fires, and orbital attacks. I learned she had never joined any army, yet had walked into more disaster zones than most soldiers see battlefields. And I learned the sentence every human responder knew. "Leave no one behind" is not a slogan, it is a threat against the universe. 3 days after the attack, the Mercy Lantern reached Sanctuary Line. The refugees disembarked under the protection of 12 coalition warships. News crews waited, officials waited, military investigators waited. Mira avoided all of them. She stayed in the hydroponics bay, replanting damaged vines. I found her there just before departure. The bay was quiet except for dripping water and the soft hum of growth lamps. Half the plants were burned. Several root columns had been torn apart during the fight. Mira moved between them carefully, trimming dead leaves, tying broken stems, saving what could still live. I stood beside her for a long moment. "They want to give you a medal," I said. "I know." "You refused." "I did." "Why?" She tied a vine to a support thread with gentle fingers. "Because medals make people look at the wrong part." "And what is the right part?" Mira looked through the glass wall at the refugee docks, where families were being reunited, where children were being carried into safe corridors, where Iri's mother held her so tightly they looked like one creature. "That," she said. For the first time I understood. The galaxy had spent centuries ranking strength by what a species could destroy: fleet tonnage, bite force, weapons yield kill, ratios, conquest history. We had mistaken violence for power because violence is loud enough to measure. Humans measured something else. How many they could carry, how much fear they could swallow before passing it on, how many times they could walk into the worst moment of someone else's life and say, with shaking hands and steady eyes, "Not this one." Not today. Before the Mercy Lantern, I believed humans were soft because they grieved openly. Afterward, I understood the truth. They grieved openly because they had no intention of becoming numb. They stayed kind on purpose. That was their discipline. That was their weapon. Years have passed since the atrium incident. The Korath never again attacked a vessel carrying human disaster personnel. Their raider clans added a warning mark to their navigation charts around humanitarian ships. Not military ships, humanitarian ships. A green symbol shaped like a leaf. When young officers ask me why pirates fear gardeners, I tell them what I saw on the Mercy Lantern. I tell them about the child, the blade, the vines, the flood, and the woman who turned a refugee ship into a battlefield without forgetting who she was fighting for. And when they ask what humans are really like, I give them the only answer that has ever felt complete. Humans are the only species I know who can kneel in the dirt to help something grow, then make an entire room regret touching it.